Aloha! Welcome to this week's video. So this week is a ton of fun. This week I'm going to be working on a dagger. So this is a European style dagger. It's just going to have a crossguard and a pummel, well, kind of a pummel. But it's going to be a ton of fun. So again, I'm going to be making this out of a swordfish bill. I was kind of deciding at one point if I wanted to make this piece or another one, but I decided to go for this one. However, the initial glue up I did on the handle material ended up having some issues. You'll see that here in just a little bit. But the first piece that I wanted to work on with regards to this dagger was going to be the crossguard. Of course, all of the wood that I'm using is Hawaiian coal wood. The crossguard is just a light grain coal wood. It's an edge wood. And so it's the edge wood is close to the bark, so it's on the edge of the tree. And it's usually a lighter wood, a softer wood, so it's not as hard and dense as the inner rings, but it still is really beautiful, and I liked the contrast that I'd get. So it'd be a very different look between the crossguard and the rest of the handle. What I'm doing there is just marking out where I'm going to be cutting in my mortise. So I'm going to be doing a mortise and tenon joint between the crossguard and the bill. I'm actually doing a technique that I see knife makers do, where they drill out the center, just kind of hollow it out, and then they use chisels. Well, I guess they wouldn't use chisels on wood, but they'd use a lathe or other like material. In this case, I'm using chisels to clean it out. I'm actually going to be drilling out some more on here, but I wanted to get a flatter section so that as I continue to drill this out, the bit wouldn't walk on me very much. And then once I got that drilled all the way through, now I'm going to go ahead and finish cleaning up that inside with my chisel set. There's quite a bit of back and forth here. I'm going to be skipping most of that in the video, but it took actually quite a long time. I've never done a connection like this before, where just a small portion of it is hollowed out, but then the other portion of it fits the bill. And so it just took me a little bit longer to kind of figure out what I was doing here, but I wanted it to be a really nice, tight, and clean fit. And the reason for that is there's not going to be any glue that goes in between the crossguard and the bill, and so I wanted it to be nice and snug and just look good from all angles. And so there's just a lot of back and forth with file work, with chisel work. I finally got it fitting nice and snug, fits in there really clean. I was really pleased with it. I did make a little bit of an error in the mortise. The whole section is a little bit crooked. I kind of assumed that I wouldn't cut it in perfect, which is why I didn't shape the crossguard after cutting it out on the bandsaw. So what you're seeing there is largely what was just cut out from the bandsaw. There isn't a whole lot of shaping being done. And I did that because I knew that I'd have to true it up to the swordfish bill in the end. So you can see there how I accidentally veered off to one side a little bit, but it's not a big deal because there's a ton of material I still need to remove from the crossguard, and so I'll be able to straighten that up as I remove that material and make it a little bit more shaped down to size. I am going to leave it a little bit. I do have some edges that I'm going to be shaping into it just to give it some more character, but I'm not going to be doing too much of that with the grinding disc. I'm going to be doing the majority of it with my sanding discs. The primary reason for that is, again, because it is the edge wood. It's a soft coal wood. It's a really soft wood, and so it removes too much material too fast to use the grinder, and so I just have to use that with a sanding disc. So now that I have that fit and mostly finished, I still have some sanding to do on it, but I'm not going to take it to finish now. All I'm doing now on it is just kind of making it clean and getting it ready so that I can pair it with the handle material. So I was just flattening the edge there, just so it sit a little bit more snug with the handle material and fit a little bit more true. So now that that's mostly finished, I can move over to the handle. I'm going to be cutting in the mortise and the handle. It's going to be a very similar mortise and tenon joint. And I accidentally snapped one of the glue joints. I think it was because I've got end wood going on end wood, and there was a little bit of a burn section there, so the glue just didn't hold. It wasn't snug. So rather than gluing it back together the same way, I decided to do like a tongue and groove joint, and that's what's going to connect the pummel to the handle. So the pummel is not going to be like a regular pummel. I'm not going to have a pummel nut that locks everything in place. The pummel is going to be glued to a part of the main body. It is a different color of koa wood. I was kind of hoping that it was going to be a little bit darker of a contrast, but it ended up being quite a bit similar. But that's okay. It actually turned out pretty awesome anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and let this sit, and while this is sitting, I'm going to do a little bit more cleanup work on the crossguard. And so what I'm doing here is I'm sanding this down to 320. I still have more work to do on it. I'm just bringing it closer to shape, and that way it'll be mostly ready once I get ready to put everything together. So I'm back at it the next day, and I'm going to be cutting out this intersection here. Same process that I did with the crossguard. I'm going to drill it out and then clean up the section with my chisel set. So I think I used a 1/4 inch chisel and a 3/8 inch chisel once I hollowed out the majority of the center section with my drill. Again, it's kind of a technique that I've seen knife makers do when working with handle material, and it actually saved quite a bit of time rather than trying to cut the entire thing out with the chisel set. And there was a little bit of back and forth. I skipped most of that just because it was kind of boring. But it's quite a few. I think there's a couple hours to get the handle really set. It's a little bit awkward dealing with the marlin bill because it's a natural material, and I want to make sure not to remove too much of the swordfish bill. If you remove too much of the swordfish bill, it can become brittle because then it's just the center section, so you have to be careful with that. But now it's in a really good spot, so I really like the way that it's looking. I did cut it out a little wide, which means that I'll probably have to fill it with epoxy just to make sure it's a nice solid fit, and I may or may not peg it. As of this point in time, I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to peg it, but I was ready to start shaping the handle material. Now there's quite a bit, it's really thick, so before I do that I'm going to go ahead and cut that down a little bit. I don't want to cut it down too far, I just want to cut it down enough that I can start working on it and not have to just have an enormous amount of wood that I have to deal with. So here's the transition between what would be the handle and what would be the pummel. In a normal dagger, the pummel would be, a different piece of material that would connect to the handle, and then you'd have a pummel nut that would thread all the way through, and between the pummel nut and the blade, it would just kind of squeeze everything together. Again, I'm not going to be doing that with this piece, just because I don't have a clean way of adding a threaded section to the swordfish bill. So instead what I'm doing here is just making the transition between this joint of the two different koa woods really clean. And so I'm cleaning it up a little bit here. I will be coming back to it later as I get a little bit further along, but that's just going to help me keep track of that transition. So as I sand down, I don't accidentally remove too much material on the transaction, and it stays a lot cleaner. Now that I've got this sanded down most to shape, it's actually starting to look pretty cool. I'm really liking how it's turning out. I like the way that it feels in my hand. It's still a little bit wide, but this upper section of koa wood was kind of inner rings, and it ended up being extremely dense and really hard. And so there's a lot of contrast, not just in color, but in hardness from one piece of the section to another piece, just because of all the different grains of koa. But now that I've got it pretty much ready for glue up, I'm just checking it to make sure everything is looking good. Before I glue it up though, I am going to be starting work on the swordfish bill. I don't want to glue it up before I do the work on the swordfish bill, just because I want to sand up pretty much all of the section that I need to avoid sand damaging the crossguard. I did notice a hole up in that upper section, which is what you saw me doing there. I was cleaning out that hole. I'll have to fill that with epoxy later. But for the moment, I don't have to worry about it because I'm really just sanding the section that's close to the connection in the crossguard. So I'm going to be filling this with epoxy. Originally I wasn't going to do that, but I decided to do it anyway just because I cut out that mortise section a little bit too wide, and I wasn't sure if it was going to hold really snug with just a peg in there, and so I decided to go ahead and epoxy it. Now at this point, because I was epoxying it, I wasn't sure if I needed the peg. I wasn't entirely certain if that was going to be necessary, but I decided to put it in anyway. I did forget to record that, but I drilled a hole, put in a 1/4 inch wooden peg, and then I went ahead and epoxied the top end section of the Swordfish bell. So while that's setting, I'm going to go ahead and clean up the handle and the pommel, doing some final sanding on it. I'm going to be sanding it down to 320. I do need to clean up the excess epoxy in between the handle material and the crossguard. There's a little bit of spillover. I tried to clean it up or wipe it down as much as possible so there wouldn't be very much, but there was still a little bit, and so I needed to clean that off. So I'm just using my chisel set to very, very carefully remove that, and then I'll be using just some hand sanding to remove the rest of it. The epoxy did do a really good job of cleaning up or filling in some of the minor gaps. There's a couple really small gaps between the handle material and the crossguard, and the epoxy did just an awesome job of cleaning that up, especially with the mixed coal wood that I had with it. I had wood shavings, and it just completely made it disappear. And so I'm just hand sanding now just to get that final look, and then coming back with the 320 grit sandpaper to finish cleaning up the pommel section of the Dagger. I really like the contrast. I really like how it's looking, but I'm going to get the handle and crossguard up to that 320, and now I can finish the top half section of the Swordfish bell. Now the epoxy was still just a little bit soft, and so it made it really easy for me to cut off the excess with that X-Acto knife or box cutter, and now I can go ahead and sand it down and get it ready for oiling. I'm going to be sanding the bill down to 320 as well. Again, I don't have to sand close to the crossguard because I already did that. So I prepared that section, that way I knew I wouldn't damage any of the crossguard. The sanding on the bill took a little bit of time just because the bill is a really hard material. It is porous, and so that's why I oil the bill as well, as it kind of helps fill in and seal up the bill so that it doesn't absorb moisture from the air and anything like that. But now that I've got everything pretty much sanded down to 320, I've cleaned up all of the edges. It's looking really nice. We can get to oiling. Now, I was excited to oil this piece from the very beginning, just because I knew it was going to look awesome. I'm going to oil the bill first, just because I wanted to see that shimmer on the bill. The bill does soak up that oil really fast, so I had to do a couple coats, really thick coats, just so that it is a good oil on it. And then the crossguard, when I oil it at first, the tongue oil does darken lighter coal wood by quite a bit. It's one of the downsides, I think, to the tongue oil. The darker grain doesn't get darker. It's really just a lighter grain that takes on a little bit darker hue. Now, when it dries, it kind of lightens up again. So it's really only this darker look while it's wet. And so once I finished oiling, obviously I'll let it sit for a day. I might do 1 or 2 more oiling sessions, but it will lighten up a little bit and have a better contrast between the Swordfish bill, the crossguard, and then the handle material. But man, did this look awesome. I was just excited for this whole piece. This piece was just a ton of fun. And I was excited to oil it the entire time. I was a little bit disappointed, although, with the Pummel section, just because I was hoping that there'd be more of a color contrast between the Pummel and the handle material, but it's all right. The curl in the coal wood was really beautiful, so it turned out just fine. So here's the finished oiled piece, but it still needs to dry, and so I'm going to go ahead and come back, let this sit for a day, and now we can take a look at the finished piece. So here's the finished Dagger. You can see it lines up really nice and straight, has a nice shimmer on it. I did add a final clear coat to it to give it a little bit more of a sheen and a little bit more protection. I love how the pommel looked out. You can see the transition, the tongue and groove joint there between the pommel material and the handle. The weight of it feels awesome. The edge work on it ended up being really beautiful. I just loved how this piece turned out. I'm going to go ahead and take this outside and we can take a look at it in the natural light as well. Man, look at that. Just absolutely gorgeous. I love this piece. Each piece I've made in this set of 7 daggers that I'm making each one has been different from the last, and each one I love almost more than the last, but I think this piece might be my favorite. Leave me in the comments below which piece that you like the best so far. I love this piece. I think it turned out great. It will be for sale if you're interested. Once I finish the last dagger, I will be posting all 7 of them on my Instagram. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave me a like and subscribe. Please leave a comment below. Comments help out a ton. The more comments there are, the more YouTube seems to recommend it to other people. So that really helps out. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining me on this video. This was a ton of fun. It was a blast. I was really excited with it. I won't be testing with this just because the tip's a little bit fragile from those holes, but I will see you on the next video. Aloha.